6.5 summits. Climbing the highest peak on each of the 7 continents is known as doing the 7 summits. Some 350 mountaineers have climbed all 7. Dick Bass, Yale class of '50, was the first to make all 7, completing this feat in 1985. He wrote a book, 7 Summits, a classic mountaineering book that chronicled his adventures. Reading the book, I concluded if Dick Bass could do that, I can too. When I was in my 50s, I fell into the 7 Summits trap, and this is my story. On a safari trip to Africa in 1989, with my wife Kathleen and my 2 daughters Michelle and Annabelle, I first laid eyes on Mount Kilimanjaro. I'd read Hemingway's Snows of Kilimanjaro in freshman English at Yale. Well, there it was, over 19,000 feet, profoundly huge and beautiful. As a family, we committed to return one day to Africa and to climb that, the highest mountain in Africa. We went back 2 years later and arranged guides and porters to take us up the Machami route, a trip that took us up in 5 days and down in 2. We all summited. Our family victory was celebrated with a week of sightseeing in the Serengeti, followed by another week on the island of Lamu in the Indian Ocean. Well, that was the first of my summits, and I was hooked. After considerable training, I went on the next year to knock off Denali in Alaska, a 33-day technical climb where I applied skills in rope climbing, knot tying, snowshoeing, cramponing, sled pulling, crevasse crossing, fixed rope ascending, and igloo building. I also learned a couple of Robert Service poems. Mount Elbrus was next. It lies in the Caucasus and at over 18,000 feet is the highest mountain in Europe. Elbrus was a 2-week expedition that included a visit to Moscow, lots of vodka, and adventures with Russian girls from the Ministry of Tourism who were assigned to us as camp followers. Aconcagua, thrusting up on the border of Argentina and Chile, was next. More on the Aconcagua climb in a couple of minutes. Next was Mount Vinson in Antarctica, clearly the most exotic and remote of all the expeditions. We lived out on the ice for 3 weeks, under the midnight sun. Summit day was minus 42 degrees. My attempt on Everest included a 12-day trek to base camp, scaling the Khumbu Icefall, where 16 Sherpa perished last month, the Western Khum, and ending for me at 21,000 feet, Camp 2. There I succumbed to salmonella and paralytic ileus, requiring a difficult return to base camp and a valiant effort to keep me alive for 3 days while various helicopters tried to reach me. I was finally rescued, taken to a Kathmandu hospital, and after a couple of days there, evacuated by medical jet to Singapore, where I spent a week in ICU. My illness had mutated to C. difficile, but it was resolved and eventually cured with vancomycin. I only got one halfway up Everest. That makes 6.5 summits. My last summit of the series was Mount Kosciuszko, a walk-up trek lying in the snowy mountain region of Australia. In 1966, I did Kosciuszko after taking a sad trip to New Zealand to attend the memorial services for the mountain guide Rob Hall. Rob died on Everest that year along with 7 others when a storm hit the mountain on summit day. Rob had been my guide on Mount Vinson. Rob Hall's wife, Jan Arnold, had been the doctor at Everest Base Camp who had kept me alive until my helicopter rescue. Well, back to Aconcagua. At 23,838 feet, this is the highest peak in the Americas. The hike into base camp is over 60 miles and takes 3 days. Mules were hired to carry loads on this first part of the trip. In preparation, I did a lot of endurance training, culminating in daily 30-minute sessions on the Stairmaster, carrying a pack loaded with 60-pound bags of sand. Still, I was the oldest climber in our group and initially worried about my readiness for such an adventure. Aconcagua is technically not difficult, but more people have been killed climbing Aconcagua than Everest and K2 combined. Many collapsed from mountain sickness as they approached the top. On our trip, we climbed past 2 dead climbers, one who'd been there for years and one who had died just the day before. We had clear but cold weather for summit day. It was minus 10 degrees. An hour or so from the top, our head guide fell ill and stopped his climb. He left us at the bottom of the Canaleta, an infamous 2,000-foot ascent up through a very steep scree. I was to ascend the Canaleta with a 20-year-old assistant guide who was really a river rafter who had never climbed a high mountain. 2 forward steps up the scree often resulted in slippage of one of the steps. Progress was slow, but I got onto a rhythm, taking 3 breaths for every forward step. 3/4 of the way up the scree at around 23,000 feet, I stopped to catch my breath for a couple of minutes. I had the summit in sight and needed only another 30 minutes or so to make it. The assistant guide ordered me to get going. Said if we weren't on top in 15 minutes, he was going to turn me around. I told him if he even spoke to me again before I got to the summit, I would kill him. Here I was taking only 3 breaths for every step. Dick Bassett said in his book that in the Canaleta he was taking 7. After 17 days of climbing and at 23,000 feet, I really would have killed him had he tried to turn me around. I was at this point committed. When near my limit, I lapsed into a mental loop that went, Robert, you can take 1 more step upward. You know you can do 1 more. Or you can stop, turn around now, and descend this pitch. Go all the way back to the tents, to warmth, to rest, to safety. You can quit. Go all the way to the bottom, go all the way home. Or you can take 1 more step upward. I'd take that 1 more step, and while taking the 3 breaths I needed, the mental loop would start all over again before the next step. Well, I summited Aconcagua in glory and returned to safety. I will never go back and reattempt Everest, but I am likely someday to look for beachfront property.